Hello. I hope you're doing okay. Today's sleepy traveller escapade is a little bit of a love letter to a place and a time that I know well, and one that is vanishing much faster than most places. As such, it has taken me longer to write. Although this story focuses a little more on the sleepier, old-world snippets of Hong Kong's colonial past, and has a slightly luxurious bent, there is much more to love about the rest of its bustle too. Its scrum of Eastern and Western cultures set upon a proud Cantonese bedrock. I hope you enjoy this initial taster, as I now invite you to take a moment to yourself for a couple of quiet, deep breaths, to get comfy and to simmer down. It's early afternoon as we emerge from the treat of a sumptuous lunch at the old colonial-style Peninsula Hotel in Kowloon. The bright, rarefied atmosphere of its veranda restaurant, infused with starched linens and comfortable grey wicker furniture, has left us feeling placid and comfortable, and the hours stretching out ahead of us shimmer with possibility. Of our agenda and route, drawn up for us by a resident friend, we know only that it will take us from where we are on the Kowloon Peninsula, through the chatter and rush of the island's central business district, past some of its more quaint and artistic offerings, and on into a quiet afternoon of green and sweeping views, although, we have been warned, not without a stiff climb. Our clothes are light, our shoes are of the comfortable variety, and we feel ready to explore. Although we have spent a few days now at this grande dame of a hotel, Hong Kong's oldest and finest among a number of very fine establishments, the restrained old-world glamour of its lobby still gives us a mild case of the slack jaw. We descend a grand staircase and stroll through the light, cavernous space, feeling small next to its oversized potted plants and elegant triple-height columns that soar up to decorative alcove ceilings and Art Deco chandeliers in white and gold. We move through the hushed bustle of waiters, serving meeting holders and tea takers at polished dark wooden tables. Delicate classical music wafts through the air, with the low murmured mingle of languages and the intermittent chime of teaspoon against teacup. Passing a crisp, white-suited doorman with a smile, we step out into the warm autumnal rush of afternoon traffic. The delicate sound of the fountain in the paved courtyard is submerged in a cloud of noise. The irate honking of Hong Kong's iconic red and white taxis, the pneumatic bursts of double-decker buses, and the loud gesticulations of passers-by as the business of the city rushes interminably on. This is a place that, at least in its denser commercial parts, has a hard time with the word slow. But we are in an obstinately relaxed kind of mood, insulated by a happy mid-holiday kind of feeling, and we float through it all at our own languid pace. We cross the busy road towards the strange and swooping beige-tiled facade of the cultural centre, planted on new land that has been pulled from the sea. Then, making our way around it, we come upon the magnificent spectacle of the Hong Kong harbour, stretching left to right under a hazy light blue sky. This dynamic swathe of ocean is fringed either side with glass-clad skyscrapers that take on the blue-grey of sky and water, with a series of forest-thick and undulating hills rising up behind. We see a few small wooden fishing boats and sampans bobbing close to the quay, their drivers helping people aboard or setting up fishing gear, while further out a chic white high-speed ferry cuts through the water, probably on its way to the casinos and cobbled Portuguese plazas of nearby Macau. The paved quayside is busy this morning. We glide through gaggles of people on group tours, following flags held aloft by their guides, past hand-holding couples and joggers and photographers. Solitary Tai Chi practitioners create little islands of peace in the Malay, drifting their limbs gently and with infinite poise between silhouettes of warrior and dancer. It is now very rare to catch the classic Hong Kong sight of older men walking with their pet birds in little cages, although the occasional stalwart may still be encountered on an early morning stroll in the city parks, his little captive flitting and singing sweetly. Instead, we notice the curious profusion of small and fluffy dogs being walked, and, in quite a few cases, pushed regally in children's prams. Moving gently along the heat-warmed harbour railings, the salt air thick in our nostrils and the lap of the ocean in our ears, we pass groups of mostly women sitting on the ground, animated with chatter. It's a Sunday today, and we've been told that many of them are domestic helpers from other Southeast Asian countries like the Philippines and Indonesia, enjoying their day off. They are just some of the unsung and low-paid workers who oil the cogs of this global business hub and snatch fragments of hard-earned happiness when they can. We approach and enter a low white building and, following a small sign that says Upper Deck Central, climb a set of stairs. At the end of a light, long hallway, smelling of salted air and freshly applied paint, we push past a set of turnstiles and join a group of people boarding the waiting Star Ferry. A Hong Kong institution, these dark green and white painted ferries have been chugging back and forth in one form or another across the short distance between the Kowloon Peninsula, attached to mainland China, and Hong Kong Island for more than 100 years. They are very affordable and part of many a daily commute. Each one is named after a star. Among them, the Morning Star, Evening Star, Rising Star, and Guiding Star. We've read that the names were originally inspired by the owner's love of a melancholy Tennyson poem that starts with the line, "Sunset, an evening star, and one clear call for me." We are ushered onto the deck by hardy-looking sailors in curiously sweet navy uniforms with white piping. The slightly more expensive upper deck has polished wooden seats, window-encased and air-conditioned sections at the front and back of the boat, and a middle section open to the sea. We take seats in the middle one, and, as the boat casts off, enjoy the soft chug of the engine as we begin to motor gently. The lull of the waves and the wet, salty tang of the breeze blending with the light smell of wood polish and engine fumes. Approaching the island, we start to notice the distinct personalities of its architectural inhabitants, at least along this showier part of the waterfront. Some, like I. M. Pei's elegant Bank of China, seem to pierce the sky in angular diagonals or spires, while others sit solid, steady and reassuring. Just 7 minutes later, our vessel pulls in gently, and we see the sailor on our boat toss the rope to another on the pier, who catches it neatly with a long billhook. We are carried out on a tide of passengers and on to a series of open-air walkways that lead us away from the waterfront and through or between the tall buildings of the central business district, a few stories above the bustle in the streets below. It is clear that this is a place of contrast. We see expensive cars, well-cut suits, and billboards for Chanel, Hermès and Longines, while below us, an old man stripped to the waist throws his weight backwards as he eases a heavily laden cart down the middle of a steep street. Not too long afterwards, we see a tiny woman, aged at least 80 and almost bent double, doing the same with a load of cardboard. Although the city is very wealthy, our friends tell us later, it is also very expensive, and state aid for the elderly remains low. The human traffic flows by, below us and beside us as we drift along. A flotsam of people, Hong Kong Chinese, mainland Chinese, and migrant or former migrant fortune seekers from across the world. The warm air is cut with the low sounds of traffic and chatter, and the smells of engines, the sea, and the occasional whiff of expensive perfume. Crossing a large street from above, we hear a rumble and the ding of a bell, and we look down to see a forest green double-decker tram trundling towards us under power lines, so tall and narrow it looks unsteady on its rails. It comes to a stop below us at a small concrete shelter in the middle of the road, and we watch a flock of people pushing to get on at the back door, while others are ejected at the front. Then, with another ding, it rumbles merrily on, cars and minibuses weaving in and out of its path. Within minutes, we see another. We stand for a while and watch these ungainly charmers roll by, reading their destination signs as they trundle below us. Sai Wan Ho, Tin Hau, Kennedy Town, Happy Valley. Continuing along the walkway, we soon find it tilting upwards between the buildings and turning into a long, low-angled escalator. We step on, and it languidly pulls us up the hill as people with tighter deadlines than ours puff determinedly past. This is the start of the world's longest outdoor covered escalator, which snakes up the neighborhood's steep inclines in little segments. The buildings that flank us start to become older, shorter, and more residential as we float by, some of them surprisingly old and cracked, while the shops get smaller and friendlier. The streets are smaller too, steeper and more winding, and we see alleyways inlaid with independent restaurants and cafes, people spilling out onto the street with coffees and glasses of wine. When we see a sign for Hollywood Road approaching, we step off the walkway and decide on a detour. This leafy winding road hugs the hillside with small and steeply pitched streets branching off, down to our right and up to our left. Wilting only slightly in the mid-afternoon heat, we walk past small restaurants, antique shops and art galleries, gazing through windows at beautiful Nepalese tapestries and graceful Chinese ceramics. Other starker galleries display bolder, contemporary pieces, inflated human figures, provocative women in military uniform. Down one alleyway, we find tourists grazing at little outdoor stalls selling curios, jade amulets, old brass candlestick holders, and silk-embroidered hand mirrors. Then we move on, enjoying the lazy warmth of the day and the bustle and colour of the streetscapes. We are suddenly distracted by the powerful, musky smell of incense and follow our noses across the street into a white, low-level temple with a tiled ceramic roof in glazed and vivid red and green. Stepping across the threshold of a large double doorway, we find ourselves in a dim, smoky and hushed world of red and gleaming gold, crowded with traditional lanterns, urns, engravings and calligraphic signs. We find out that the temple is a tribute to the god of literature and of war, both worshipped by students around the time of the Qing dynasty. We stand for a moment in the cool quiet and picture the bowed scholars from eras past making their fervent offerings to these fierce godly icons. Looking up, we find incense curling from the ceiling in great spirals. Returning into the light and heat, we make our way back along the other side of Hollywood Road, following a large old stone retaining wall threaded with the thick, fluid creepers and vines of great banyan trees planted above. Many of the trees look close to a century old and as ancient and magical as banyans can be, their trunks melting into the wall below like wax. There is little else in this city that seems to have made it to such a ripe old age, other than its temples, perhaps. And as we walk under their hospitable shade, we reflect on what these trees may have seen as the fortunes of Hong Kong and its fragrant harbour were hewn by the forces of war and trade. During the earliest years of the British colonial administration, forced upon the Chinese as a result of the Opium Wars, under the 4-year occupation of the Japanese during the Second World War, as a place of refuge for skilled Chinese migrants fleeing the Chinese Civil War and turning the city first into a manufacturing and trading centre, and then, for a while, with its influx of international fortune seekers, a global finance centre and shipping hub. As we leave the shade of the banyans, we start to notice signs of a newer phase of Hong Kong's history in traces of street art. On the side walls of shops, down alleyways, stuck on the poles of signs and electrical boxes. These are colourful, defiant. Among them we see the repeating symbol of a yellow umbrella, the insignia of a recent and indomitable protest movement that swelled across the territory to try and preserve Hong Kong's unique identity, its rule of law, and its separate political system, as was promised by the Chinese government in the 90s when it took back the territory from the United Kingdom. The street work is brave, fearful, inspiring, and increasingly sad for the promise that was not kept. Under the escalator, we catch sight of a small local tea and lunch shop, or cha-cha-tang, and we duck inside into a white-tiled, air-conditioned cool. 2 apron staff serve customers with good-humoured bluntness, sitting at small formica booths and tables with little stools from a small steam-emitting kitchen in the back. We order Hong Kong-style tea, and it comes, clattered down in front of us in fittingly durable ceramic teacups and saucers. We sit for a while, listening to the unfamiliar Cantonese banter and sipping the tea. It is strong, sweet, and thickened with evaporated milk, perhaps a little bitter, but also somehow woodsy and comforting. An older man at the table next to us sits with a newspaper nearby, enjoying a crusty toasted bun, slathered in butter, and what looks to be condensed milk. On our way out, we stop to look at a section of a wall covered in colourful pieces of sticky paper, written across by patrons. On a closer look, most are in Chinese script, but one, in English, says, "Hong Kong, never give up." Another plaintively says, "Where must we go?" The proprietor sees us reading this and gives us a small, sad smile. Back on our escalator, we find the streets becoming greener. There are more mature trees, and greenery winds its way up mildewed buildings and between the cracks in paving stones as nature reasserts itself. This is only to be expected. Few outsiders realize that Hong Kong's dense urbanity makes up less than a quarter of the territory. The rest is made up of hilly country parks, agricultural land, and natural coastline. The escalator having run its course, we find ourselves deposited gently on a wide, flat, residential street with high-rise buildings planted among a rearing green and tangled backdrop. We follow it for a while, turn off up a steep and smaller tributary, and see, at the end of it, a bank of greenery rising far into the sky. Victoria Peak. With the lowering sun and lengthening shadows, we feel the warmth and humidity of the late afternoon soften a little, and this lightens further as we leave the small road onto a narrow path and enter a steep, tree-shaded world of green and chaotic undergrowth. Here we feel the faint trace of a breeze on our wet skin and detect the sounds of trickling water nearby. The small paved and curling pathway draws us slowly upwards in a series of just bearable inclines and winding hairpin turns. The foliage is thick either side and overhead. We pass displays of subtropical ferns, and others the size and shape of giant elephant ears, and all around us golden light filters down as if through water. The air smells green, moist and earthy as we draw it in heavily, feeling equally waterlogged as we puff upwards. After some time, stopping to catch our breath, we find that the rush of the city is gone. Replacing it, the insistent high-pitched buzz of cicadas, the scattered chirp of birds, and the occasional rustle and crack of the undergrowth as little beings go about their business. It is otherwise quiet and calm. The late afternoon air has now become cool in our nostrils, and the dappled light has taken on an amber tone. Hong Kong's lush Victoria Peak rears up close to 2,000 feet amid the other hills in its western half, encircled by dense bands of urbanity around its lower sea line. In true form, the early 19th century colonialists claimed it quickly as their own because of its panoramic views and its cooler climate. The governor built his summer residence there, and many grand and comfortable homes followed. These would once have been reached only by sedan chairs, carried by Hong Kong Chinese people, who were otherwise banned from living or travelling there, unless as domestic help. Now, seeing better days, it remains an exclusive address, and is popular with visitors and locals alike for its views, its old wooden tram that pulls people up and down it, and its busy mall at the top. Arriving by foot is a hard but altogether more peaceful experience, and a half step back in time. Large mouldering houses, 80 to 100 years old, nestle into the sides of the hill, along with an old converted Victorian-era hospital. Little-used tennis courts lie quietly overgrown, and creepers wend their way through old stone retaining walls, all forgotten in favour of newer concoctions in sleek glass, steel and stone. Our climb finally levels out onto an intersecting path marked the Morning Trail, and we know that we are now close to our destination and a cold drink. The trail is a small, peaceful footpath that circumnavigates the crest of the peak, offering strollers a 360-degree view of Hong Kong. To the south lies the Aberdeen fishing harbour, a cluster of residential towers and a few distant islands. To the north, a busy metropolis and mainland sprawl. The diminishing light grazes the surface of the South China Sea as we walk along what has become our evening trail. A few large ships rendered in silhouette as they ply the still busy trading path. Deciding to save the grand finale of our day until full sundown, we emerge from the trail into a busy plaza and duck straight, as instructed by our friend, into a strange but beautiful little stone lodge set to the side of our path. The Peak Lookout restaurant would look more at home in Geneva than the crest of a hill in Southeast Asia, and we soak up its old-fashioned tiled floor, lazy ceiling fans, and polished wooden bar with surprised pleasure. Opting for cocktails on the flagstone garden terrace, we then sit with cool gin and tonics as the light softens around us, accompanied by the chirp and thrum of the quietening vegetation and the strains of the Lookout's grand piano. Once the sky above us has burnished sufficiently pink, we ask the waiter to hold our table for dinner and wander back out and across the busy plaza. The warm night is pleasant, and the breeze from the hillside falls fragrantly. There is almost a magnetic pull towards the clusters of people that line the way ahead of us. Although they block much of the view down the hill, a bright iridescent glow stretches high and wide above them, making the cloud haze pearly in pinks, purples, greys and orange against glimpses of dark sky. As we move forward and insert ourselves into the crowd, our vision tips over rough stone walls and into a riot of light. The city's skyscrapers shimmer from above, like best-dressed guests at a glittering ball. Thousands of stacked windows burn brightly in the night, while the ethereal, low-set orange of streetlights near and far give the impression of a city on fire. A few buildings throw out bright blues and greens, their peacock displays glistening in the quiet dark of the harbour, and the familiar silhouette of the Bank of China rises high in the foreground with its slicing white diagonals. We, like those around us, fall silent at the sight and stand quiet, soaking up the aura of a great and changing city, feeling the electric buzz of its energy mingled with the ancient softness of the surrounding hills and the dark quiet behind of sleeping islands and slow ships. Time passes as we stand, held by the sight, for who knows how long, until the silence is broken by a rogue stomach rumble, upon which we pull gently free, turn, and make our way back across the plaza towards dinner.